It is true to its motto, Semper Paratus, always ready.
Donald Hallman. He's a 97-year young resident of Willow Valley Communities. And he's what we consider the quintessential example of why we celebrate Veterans Day each year. Don's a native of Pennsylvania, and right out of high school, he headed for Penn State in State College to earn his degree in engineering. But World War II intervened. And so as a junior in 1942, he hitchhiked to Harrisburg to visit the Army recruiter to tell him he wanted to join up. He went through the preliminary tests and began the exams, and it was determined that Don was a few pounds underweight to be acceptable to the Army. Not to be discouraged, he went to the grocery store and bought every banana he thought he could eat and ate it, drank all the water he could drink, went back to the recruiter and asked for an immediate reweigh. Well, you can tell from the story that he passed barely and was soon on his way to basic training. His basic training was in Miami, Florida, and while there he took a battery of tests to determine what career field he might be available for in the United States Army. They suggested he could be a pilot in the Army Air Forces, and he thought that was a great idea, so he was soon off to Uvalde, Texas. And at Uvalde, he did his preliminary flight training, was transferred to Waco, Texas, for multi-engine training to get certified on that kind of aircraft. And he says, Waco wasn't that difficult, but there was a significant distraction from the Baylor co-eds. But he was able to overcome that, got his wings, and one final training assignment to Barksdale Field in Shreveport, Louisiana. It was here that Don met the Martin B-26 Marauder, the plane that was to be his for the rest of World War II. The B-26 was known as a very difficult plane to fly and a particularly difficult plane to land because of the high landing speed. I mention that because in one 30-day period at the training base, 15 B-26s crashed while students tried to learn to land them. Don said he knew the plane had a reputation for being a difficult one to fly, but he thought it was a great airplane. And the more he flew it, the more he loved it. He was completed with his training, given a brand new B-26 and a crew of 5 to fly to Europe, where those 6 men would join the pool of available resources to fly in the European theater. On the way, Don and his crew had a stop for refueling in Greenland. It was bitter cold, but he and his 5 fellow crewmen decided it was a good idea to go skinny dipping in a glacier pool. Don says, never again. Off from Greenland to England, where he joined 9th Air Force and the unit that would be his for the rest of the war, the 497th Bombardment Squadron of the 344th Bombardment Group. 9th Air Force earned its reputation in day-to-day bombing, incessant bombing in the European theater. But it got particularly noteworthy praise for its support of the Battle of the Bulge, the Normandy invasion, and the attacks on the Ploesti synthetic fuel tanks. In June of 1944, the month of D-Day, 9th Air Force lost 44 B-26s and all their crews. On the first day of attacking in Ploesti, 310 United States Air Force airmen lost their lives. On the night before, all had been told, write a letter to your family, seal it in an envelope, and put it on your bed before you go to the flight line. Don's commander was a stickler for what Don calls a tight formation. That meant flying close enough together so that it was very difficult for the German fighters to split your squadron apart and then take you off one by one. Don remembers looking to the left of his cockpit, to the right of his cockpit, and seeing squadrons scattered and the devastating results that occurred as a consequence of that. Don himself was only forced down once, as a consequence of enemy air fire. He says it this way in his journal. On one mission, we had an engine and our nose gear blown up by enemy fire. Since we couldn't keep up with the squadron, we dropped our bombs on the target and headed for the clouds. It was the obvious we wouldn't make it back to the base, so on the way I asked the navigator if we were yet over friendly territory. His answer was, "How the hell should I know?" But the enemy flak that came up almost immediately answered his question for him. They were still shooting at us, so we kept the plane in the air as long as we could, and were lucky to make it back to a U.S. glider base. There were 6 men in Don's crew, and those 6 men became a brotherhood. In fact, Don remembers that every man in his squadron was a brother in that sense. And so he very much hated to be pulled out of his own aircraft's crew because of his proficiency sent to train and certify newly arrived crews from the States so they could join the squadron in the bombing runs. They were initially based in England, moved to France, and then moved to Germany, all the time concerned about their fellow crew members. Here's what he says in one case. When we didn't fly on a particular mission, we'd all count the number of planes returning. A very few times, all would make it back, and we'd hit the bar to celebrate. Don, as all the pilots, knew there was a magic number of missions that once flown would earn you a ticket back to the United States. Initially, that number was 25 missions, and many of us have seen the famous movie Memphis Belle, where the crew of the Memphis Belle was flying their 25th mission. They successfully completed the mission, and they all got to go home. But because of the tragic loss of pilots and other crew members, that number kept growing. Here's a photo of one plane of Don's squadron mates that he knew. The picture was taken on February 9th, 1945. When the war ended, Don was in the air and got word through the radio. Don wasn't flying his 25th mission or his 30th mission or his 40th mission. On that particular day, Don was flying his 50th mission within 9th Air Force. Shortly afterward, he was given a B-26 aircraft that had survived the war and a chance to fly back to the United States in it. If you haven't had a chance to meet this quiet, unassuming, gentle man, my prayer is that this pandemic ends soon enough that everybody who hears this story will have a chance to meet him and get to know him as many of the rest of us have. The greatest generation earned its name because of the capacity and the character and the courage of men and women like Donald Walton Hallman, a veteran.